to wear masks, practice social distancing, and follow other basic measures. Health experts are hoping Joe Biden's administration will put in place something Donald Trump has not, a comprehensive national testing strategy. Schools around the country are confronting off-the-rails numbers of failing grades amid the pandemic. The U.S. has reported more than 14.7 million cases and over 282,300 deaths. According to the Johns Hopkins University, the global total 67.1 million cases and 1.5 million deaths. As the number of coronavirus cases continue to reach unprecedented levels, the full effects from the expected surge from the Thanksgiving holiday still have not been felt. The chief advisor for United States efforts to develop a coronavirus vaccine said he planned to meet with President-elect Joe Biden this week before the expected first round of vaccinations in the country later this month. Rudy Giuliani, the personal attorney to President Trump, has tested positive for COVID-19. He was admitted to the Georgetown University Hospital yesterday. Southern California went into a strict lockdown at midnight with more than 20 million people under stay-at-home orders triggered after hospitals faced being overwhelmed by record COVID-19 cases. Governor Gavin Newsom announced new statewide bans on gatherings and non-essential activities that would come into effect once 85% of the intensive care unit beds have been filled. California imposing that stay-at-home order as capacity at hospital intensive care units fell to dangerously low levels. And we do have most Californians that are going to be staying home for Christmas, whether they like it or not, under these new restrictive mandates that went into effect last night across much of the state. President-elect Joe Biden will nominate California Attorney General Javier Becerra for Secretary of Health and Human Services as soon as this morning, as he builds up his team to fight the COVID-19 pandemic. And President Trump kicked off a night rally in Georgia for Republican senators by recycling the falsehood that he won the state. President Trump's administration is pushing to finalize new immigration restrictions before his term ends in January. Mexico's President Andrés Manuel López Obrador has tossed another hot potato to President-elect Joe Biden with a proposal that would restrict U.S. agents in Mexico and remove their diplomatic immunity. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has declared victory today after his allies swept congressional elections boycotted by the opposition and considered fraudulent by international critics. Iran and Venezuela have grown closer in recent years as both countries seek to counter the intense pressure campaign that the United States has mounted against them. The top U.S. Navy official in the Mideast has said that America has reached an uneasy deterrence with Iran after months of regional attacks and seizures at sea, even as tensions remain high between Washington and Tehran over the Islamic Republic's nuclear program. Iran said today it was glad the United States got the message and modified its behavior in the Persian Gulf. A satellite-controlled machine gun was used in last week's assassination of a top Iranian nuclear scientist, Mohsin Fakhrizadeh. And a prominent Saudi prince harshly criticized Israel at a Bahrain security summit that was remotely attended by Israel's foreign minister. Ethiopia's month-long war in its northern Tigray region has severely hampered efforts to fight one of Africa's worst coronavirus outbreaks as the fighting has displaced almost 1 million people and strained local humanitarian services to the breaking point. Kuwaitis elected a new parliament in an election that saw two-thirds of lawmakers and the country's only female legislator lose their seats. And voters lined up early in Ghana this morning to cast their ballots in presidential and legislative elections likely to test the West African nation's credentials as one of the most politically stable countries on the continent. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi is paying a state visit to France for talks on fighting terrorism, the conflict in Libya and other regional issues amid criticism from human rights groups over the Egyptian leader's crackdown on dissent. Meanwhile, in Paris, scores of hooded anarchists launched projectiles at riot police, smashed up shop fronts, torched cars and burned barricades during a demonstration in the French capital against police violence and a draft security law. The number of new COVID-19 infections per day in France is unlikely to fall to a 5,000 target by the 15th of this month as the population is not sufficiently respecting social distancing measures. And the pomp and ceremony of the Nobel Prize ceremonies has been reined in this year amid measures to slow the spread of the coronavirus. No glitzy banquets honoring winners in Stockholm or Oslo as the global pandemic curtails the usual celebrations. Instead, their achievements recognized and rewarded at low-key ceremonies where they live and work in Europe and the United States, with the first one today in Berlin. Germany is looking to impose tougher restrictions on movement after a nationwide partial shutdown failed to bring contagion rates down to manageable levels. Chancellor Angela Merkel's chief of staff has called for a meeting between the federal government and heads of the country's 16 states, which could be convened before Christmas to decide on a plan. More than 300 people detained in the Belarusian capital yesterday, where crowds of people took to the streets for the 18th consecutive weekend. And some 3,000 to 5,000 Hungarians could participate in clinical trials of Russia's Sputnik vaccine, which Russia began rolling out via 70 clinics in Moscow. And about 50 hospitals in the UK will receive the first batch of the coronavirus vaccine created by American drug maker Pfizer and Germany's BioNTech, according to BBC. Britain and the European Union discussing implementation of the Brexit divorce deal today, when the government will press ahead with legislation that breaches a withdrawal agreement in Parliament. The prehistoric monument of Stonehenge in southern England was closed to visitors after dozens of protesters staged a trespass against the British government's road-building plans, including a new tunnel near the World Heritage Site. And the conservation status for Australia's Great Barrier Reef has declined from significant concern to critical due to increasing impacts associated with climate change. The emergence of Japan's coldest city as a COVID-19 hotspot has raised fears among health experts that it could be a sign of what the rest of the nation may face as winter sets in and more people stay indoors. Officials of Japan's space agency hailed the arrival of rare asteroid samples on Earth after they were collected by space probe Hayabusa 2 during an unprecedented mission. New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern today vowed accountability for the families of last year's Christchurch mosque attack victims ahead of the public release of a major report into the country's worst massacre. Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to the World News on Radio Caravan. 6 supporters of Indonesian Islamic cleric Rizik Shihab were killed in a shootout today, raising worries the clash could reignite tensions between authorities and Islamist groups in the world's biggest Muslim-majority country. And a U.S. President-elect Joe Biden likely to take a tough stance against China, according to Foreign Minister Wang Yi, and he said that Beijing and the U.S. should initiate dialogue at all levels. The United States is preparing to impose sanctions on at least a dozen Chinese officials over their alleged role in Beijing's disqualification of elected opposition legislators in Hong Kong. And a Chinese probe orbiting the moon today in preparation for the returning of samples of the lunar surface to Earth for the first time in almost 45 years. Japan, France and the United States will hold joint military drills on land and sea for the first time in May next year as the Chinese military steps up activity in the region. The UK is sending its largest warship, aircraft carrier HMS Queen Elizabeth, and its strike task group to the Indian Ocean for its maiden voyage, with London describing the move as the country's most ambitious deployment for 2 decades. Indian officials say China is assisting rebel groups that have stepped up attacks on its border with Myanmar in recent months, opening another front in the conflict between two nations already engaged in a deadly standoff in the Himalayas. Indian and Chinese officials are in communication on the issue of allowing Indians to return to China. And the body of the Indian Navy pilot who went missing after his MiG-29 crashed in the Arabian Sea has been found. The body of Commander Nishant Singh, found on the seabed 70 meters below water, 30 miles off the Goa coast after an extensive search. As the protesters against the contentious farm laws intensifies, farmers across the country will observe a nationwide strike, the Bharat Bandh, tomorrow. And leaders of 11 parties, including Congress President Sonia Gandhi, DMK Chief Stalin, NCP Patriarch Sharad Pawar, Samajwadi Party Chief Akhilesh Yadav and Left Front Sitaram Yechuri and D. Raja said they would lend their wholehearted support to the Bharat Bandh tomorrow. It is Chief Minister Uddhav Thackeray assuring the Shiromani Akali Dal that the state government would participate in the movement against the centre in the interest of farmers. Delhi Chief Minister Arvind Kejriwal met the farmers who've been protesting at the Singhu border and said his Aam Aadmi Party has always stood by the farmers. A set of 3 laws on agriculture passed by Parliament in September has led to these thousands of farmers staging protests on the outskirts of Delhi over the last 2 weeks. And led by 2-time Asian Games gold-winning former wrestler Kartar Singh, a few sportspersons from Punjab marched towards Rashtrapati Bhavan to return 35 national sports awards in a show of solidarity with the farmers agitating. National capital engulfed by very dense fog this morning, and India's first human spaceflight mission Gaganyaan is likely to be delayed by a year owing to the coronavirus pandemic. As India's active cases slipped below the 400,000 mark today, and the caseload rose to 96.44 lakhs, with the total number of people who've recuperated from the disease crossing 91 lakhs, pushing the national recovery rate to 94.37. And after staying around the same level for 3 weeks, fresh cases have fallen by around 16% from the previous 7 days. And as the crisis continues, a mystery disease has hit the Eluru region of Andhra Pradesh. 28 people suffering from the symptoms of this mysterious disease were admitted to the government hospital. And we'll keep you updated on that right here on Radio Caravan. The series pocketed and their confidence restored. India would eye nothing less than a clean sweep when they take on the Australian side, significantly weakened by injury blows in the third and final T20 International in Sydney tomorrow. We do have New Zealand captain Kane Wilson rising to the joint second spot with Indian skipper Virat Kohli in the latest ICC Test rankings. And Pakistan's cricket team have been cleared to leave managed isolation in Christchurch, pending final health ministry approval after no positive results were recorded in a fifth round of COVID-19 testing out there. British airline Virgin Atlantic commencing its flight operations for Pakistan from the 13th of this month. And leaders of the Pakistan Democratic Movement said they will go ahead with the Lahore public meeting scheduled for the 13th of this month, despite the government warning of legal action. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is